Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Victoria and Nate completely speechless, their jaws almost physically dropping as the air itself seemed to vibrate with the weight of her revelation. It all began innocuously enough, in the plush, sunlight-drenched drawing room of Victoria's newly renovated penthouse, where the scent of fresh lilies mingled with the faint trace of expensive cologne lingering from Nate's earlier visit, the two of them seated on the cream-colored sectional, each nursing a glass of vintage Chardonnay while attempting to discuss business and personal matters in a way that was simultaneously casual, yet charged with the unspoken tensions of past betrayals and unhealed wounds, and Claire, who had walked in with the same calculated calm she had always carried like armor, paused mid-step, her gaze flicking between the two of them with that inscrutable mixture of serenity and latent threat that made everyone in Genoa City instinctively lean in whenever she spoke, and then, with a deliberate slowness that heightened the suspense, she said the 5 words that would irreversibly alter the trajectory of everyone's lives in that room. "Victoria, Nate, it's Daniel." The sheer simplicity of the words belied their cataclysmic implications, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop as Victoria's champagne glass wobbled in her hand, her fingers tightening instinctively around the stem as a flush of disbelief and fear painted her cheeks, while Nate's eyes widened in a mixture of horror and incredulity, a bead of sweat forming on his temple as he processed the enormity of what Claire had just revealed, the air thickening with a silence so dense that even the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed deafening, punctuating the suspense with almost cruel precision. Memories and suspicions collided in Victoria's mind like storm-driven waves. The knowledge of Daniel's clandestine actions, his secret alliances, the whispered warnings she had received from half-trusted sources, all flooding back with the intensity of a lightning strike, each recollection sharpening the sharp, metallic edge of betrayal she now felt coursing through her veins, while Nate, who prided himself on composure and rationality, found himself momentarily paralyzed, a rare crack in the armor he so carefully maintained, because the implications of Daniel's involvement were far-reaching, touching not only the fragile web of trust between them but also the very foundations of Genoa City's most powerful families, threatening to upend alliances, rekindle old rivalries, and potentially destroy the tenuous peace that had only recently been brokered among the city's elite. Claire, sensing the dual shockwaves reverberating through the room, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that didn't reach her eyes, because she understood the art of timing better than anyone, the way a single revelation, precisely delivered, could act as a detonator in a room already fraught with secrets, lies, and half-truths, and she had spent weeks orchestrating every moment, every glance, every subtle shift in tone to maximize the effect of those 5 words, watching carefully as Victoria's mind raced, her internal monologue a cacophony of fear, anger, and disbelief, questioning everything she thought she knew about loyalty, family, and love, while Nate's thoughts darted like fireflies in a summer dusk, each one illuminating a new angle of danger or betrayal that could ripple outward from this moment, forever altering their strategies, relationships, and positions of influence. Outside the penthouse windows, the city of Genoa City carried on, obliviously, unaware that within this luxurious enclave, a storm had erupted that could potentially reshape the landscape of power, love, and vengeance, and as the initial shock began to settle into a tense, vibrating stillness, Victoria's voice, usually so controlled and commanding, faltered slightly, betraying the emotional quake she was attempting to conceal, the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her designer blouse, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the barely audible catch in her breath, while Nate's hands, usually so steady when navigating both the treacherous waters of corporate negotiations and personal entanglements, rested rigidly on his knees, knuckles white, his normally confident posture now taut with the weight of uncertainty. The 5 words echoing in his mind like an ominous drumbeat, each repetition layering on a new dimension of fear, strategy, and dread. The room itself seemed to contract around them, the plush walls of the penthouse suddenly oppressive, as if the very decor conspired to emphasize the gravity of the moment, and Claire, fully aware of the psychological pressure she was exerting, allowed silence to stretch for a long beat longer than necessary, savoring the precise moment when Victoria's eyes finally locked on hers, the storm of recognition, horror, and betrayal blazing in them, mirrored by the stunned, almost helpless gaze of Nate, who now understood that the delicate equilibrium of his world had just been irrevocably disturbed, that alliances he thought were solid were suddenly suspect, and that trust, once fractured in Genoa City, was notoriously difficult to restore. Memories of past conflicts, boardroom battles, whispered confrontations in shadowed corridors, clandestine meetings at darkened restaurants, flooded back with brutal clarity, layering additional tension on top of the immediate shock, reminding both Victoria and Nate that in this city, secrets had a way of surfacing with perfect timing, and when they did, the fallout could be catastrophic, the emotional toll immense, and the paths forward fraught with peril. Claire, meanwhile, maintained a calm exterior, though beneath the surface, a surge of vindication coursed through her, a quiet thrill at having orchestrated a revelation so potent that it destabilized two of the most unshakable figures in Genoa City, and she knew that the next few hours, days, and weeks would be a delicate dance, a chess game played with knives where every move, every word, every glance would carry monumental weight, because now, with Daniel's involvement revealed, the possibilities for manipulation, leverage, revenge, and redemption multiplied exponentially, creating a tense landscape where alliances could shift in an instant, loyalties would be tested, and hidden agendas would inevitably surface, while Victoria and Nate, still processing the bombshell, began to formulate tentative responses, weighing the emotional cost of confrontation against the strategic necessity of controlling the narrative, all the while aware that Claire, as ever, held the upper hand simply by having spoken first, by having controlled the timing, the words, and the delivery of this explosive truth. The conversation that followed was a careful, tense navigation through the treacherous waters of immediate reactions, the subtle attempts to mask panic with forced composure, the glances exchanged across the room that spoke volumes without a single word being uttered, and yet, every attempt at control was undermined by the raw emotional undercurrent that Claire's revelation had unleashed. An undercurrent that threatened to sweep all of them into a maelstrom of confrontation, accusation, and revelation, because in Genoa City, emotions were never easily contained, and when secrets were exposed, the ripple effects spread far beyond the immediate circle, touching friends, enemies, and family alike, destabilizing carefully laid plans and forcing every character to confront both their vulnerabilities and their ambitions in equal measure. As the minutes ticked by, the penthouse seemed suspended in a bubble of tension, a charged space where every sound, the clink of glass, the whisper of fabric, the faint hum of traffic below, felt magnified, a reminder that outside, life carried on unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred within, and as Victoria finally found her voice, a measured, tremulous note of authority breaking through the fog of shock, she issued a series of carefully considered questions, her mind racing to evaluate the truth of Claire's statement, the potential motives, the timing, and the consequences, while Nate, ever the analytical counterpart, began to map out scenarios, possibilities, and contingencies, mentally rehearsing every possible outcome, every potential response, aware that one wrong move could not only compromise their personal safety, but also their professional standing and influence across the city. Claire, sensing the brewing storm, remained outwardly serene, her face a mask of placid calm, though inside, a storm of satisfaction and anticipation churned, knowing that she had not only disrupted the present equilibrium, but had also planted the seeds for future leverage, for manipulation, and for control, because in the world of the young and the restless, timing was everything, and the perfect revelation could forever alter the power dynamics, relationships, and fortunes of everyone involved, as it now had with Victoria and Nate, who sat on the cusp of a new reality, one where trust was fractured, alliances were uncertain, and every glance, word, and gesture carried the weight of potential catastrophe. And in this charged moment, where past secrets collided with present consequences and future uncertainties loomed like storm clouds on the horizon, Claire's 5 words echoed endlessly in the minds of all present, a simple yet devastating reminder that in Genoa City, nothing was ever truly safe, nothing could be taken for granted, and a single revelation, spoken with perfect timing and precision, had the power to upend everything. And as the initial shock of Claire's revelation, Victoria, Nate, it's Daniel, continued to reverberate through the penthouse, the atmosphere grew almost suffocating, a charged electric tension that seemed to vibrate in every corner, seeping into the very walls themselves, and with each tick of the ornate clock, Victoria's mind spiraled further, racing through years of memories, past confrontations, and decisions she had made, some now illuminated in a different light, because if Daniel was involved in whatever Claire had just revealed, it called into question everything from boardroom dealings to family loyalties, from whispered conversations in shadowed hallways to the subtle maneuverings she had undertaken to protect those closest to her. And as these thoughts collided inside her head, her heartbeat quickened, a rapid drumbeat underscoring the weight of the revelation, while Nate, sitting rigidly beside her, felt an almost physical tightening in his chest, a pressure that made it difficult to breathe, because though he had faced countless crises in Genoa City, none had ever come with such precise emotional impact, such a perfect storm of personal and professional ramifications, and he realized that in that very moment, everything he had believed to be stable, the alliances, the loyalties, the perceived control over situations, was suddenly teetering on the edge of chaos. And as he watched Victoria wrestle with her own swirling emotions, he felt a surge of protectiveness, but also a creeping fear that, even together, they might not be able to contain the fallout, because in Claire's carefully constructed world, there was never just one layer of manipulation or one consequence. There were always multiple, cascading, interlocking consequences that could explode unpredictably, like a line of dominoes set on edge, ready to tumble at the slightest provocation. And then there was Daniel himself, invisible yet omnipresent in the minds of everyone in that room, a specter whose influence had suddenly become undeniable, whose past actions, secrets, and potential agendas loomed over Victoria and Nate like a storm cloud threatening to engulf the penthouse, and Victoria's thoughts immediately shifted to him, to Daniel, to what exactly Claire meant, to the timing of her revelation, to whether Daniel knew Claire had spoken, to whether this was part of a larger plan, and to what extent they had been manipulated without even realizing it, and all of these swirling questions made her restless, fidgeting slightly, her perfectly manicured fingers now unconsciously tracing patterns on the side of her champagne glass, as if the tactile act could somehow anchor her to reality, while her mind raced at lightning speed, calculating, reassessing, analyzing every potential implication of Daniel's involvement, of Claire's timing, and of Nate's own likely reactions, while Nate, still sitting rigidly beside her, found his normally confident mind now clouded by a haze of doubt and fear, every possible scenario cascading through his thoughts like a violent waterfall, from Daniel as an ally to Daniel as an adversary, from minor scheming to potentially catastrophic betrayal, and in that instant, he realized that in Genoa City, one revelation could be enough to destabilize even the most carefully constructed world, and that now, with Daniel's shadow cast over them, there was no turning back, no pretending, no rationalizing away the truth. They would have to confront it, navigate it, and survive the storm it would inevitably unleash. Meanwhile, Claire stood like a maestro who had just struck the final chord of a symphony, perfectly aware of the psychological orchestration she had executed with deadly precision, and she allowed herself a moment to observe the subtle changes in posture, the micro-expressions of disbelief and fear, the almost imperceptible flicker of panic behind Nate's eyes, the storm of emotions dancing across Victoria's face as the gears of her mind spun furiously, and she knew she had achieved exactly what she intended: destabilization, confusion, and power, all in one carefully delivered line. And yet, even in this triumph, she remained outwardly serene, a model of controlled poise, knowing that to show any overt satisfaction would diminish the strategic advantage she now held. Because in Genoa City, the perception of control was as valuable as control itself, and anyone who appeared to celebrate too openly could quickly become a target, a pawn, or even an enemy. Victoria, finally finding her voice after what felt like an eternity, spoke, her words measured, yet trembling with underlying emotion, probing, questioning, attempting to navigate the treacherous waters that Claire had now thrust them into. But every question she asked seemed to generate more tension rather than clarity, as Claire's answers were carefully calibrated, revealing just enough to destabilize without ever fully disclosing her intentions, leaving Victoria and Nate to wrestle with fragments, insinuations, and the terror of uncertainty. And the more they tried to extract information, the more the penthouse seemed to shrink around them, as if the walls themselves were closing in, magnifying every heartbeat, every intake of breath, every subtle movement, until the room became an arena of psychological warfare, where the only weapons were words, glances, and the invisible weight of unspoken truths. And every pause carried the suspense of impending disaster. Nate's mind, always strategic, immediately began mapping out potential alliances and counter-alliances, considering who might be loyal to Daniel, who might have been manipulated by Claire, and who could potentially exploit the situation for personal gain. And as he worked through these calculations, the enormity of the stakes became clear. Not just Victoria's emotional stability, not just the immediate danger to their personal and professional lives, but the potential domino effect that could cascade through Genoa City's power structures, affecting boardroom deals, family relationships, and even long-buried rivalries that had been dormant but were now primed to erupt. And as he thought of Daniel, a chill ran down his spine, because Daniel was notoriously unpredictable, brilliant in his manipulations, and utterly fearless when it came to using emotional leverage, and Nate realized with a sinking feeling that they were now playing on Daniel's field, whether they liked it or not, and every misstep, every hesitation, could be exploited, twisted, and turned against them in ways that might leave them exposed, humiliated, or even defeated. Victoria, meanwhile, oscillated between anger and fear, the two emotions intertwining in a way that made it difficult to maintain the poised exterior she had carefully cultivated over decades, and she felt the familiar, almost visceral pull of maternal instinct combined with a razor-sharp strategic mind, forcing her to consider not just the emotional implications, but the practical ramifications of Daniel's actions, of Claire's revelation, and of the fragile alliances that were suddenly dangling by a thread. And as she processed the information, memories of past betrayals, of Genoa City's endless cycles of deception, of whispered conversations in shadowed corners, of alliances formed and shattered in the blink of an eye, flooded her consciousness, each memory sharpening the edge of fear and anticipation, because in a city like this, knowledge was power, and misinformation, manipulation, and misdirection were the weapons of choice for those who sought control, dominance, or revenge. Even as Victoria and Nate struggled to process the revelation, the psychological weight of Claire's presence intensified, her calm exterior a constant, almost suffocating reminder that she was the orchestrator of the chaos they were now forced to navigate, and her ability to control the narrative, to manipulate timing, and to exploit emotion made her an almost untouchable force in that room. A masterful puppeteer pulling strings that Victoria and Nate had not even realized existed, and the longer the conversation stretched, the more both of them felt the subtle pressure of her control, like invisible fingers pressing on their very thoughts, forcing them to react, to anticipate, and to make decisions under duress, where every word, every glance, and every pause carried the potential for disaster or advantage. And yet, even in the midst of the tension, both Victoria and Nate recognized that they had a shared understanding, an unspoken alliance forged over years of navigating Genoa City's treacherous landscape, and as they exchanged a fleeting, loaded glance, it was clear that while Claire had momentarily upended their world, they were not entirely powerless, that together, they could potentially regroup, strategize, and respond in ways that might mitigate the damage or even turn the situation to their advantage. But doing so would require an unprecedented level of coordination, intelligence, and emotional control because